Archie and Friends, 1992, 18. Zelda considerately wonders how Sabrina's feeling, and Sabrina says she still feels strange and this is the weirdest flu she ever had. Why won't her witch family have given her a cure for the flu? Go figure, she sneezes and something magical happens. She duplicates, and the real Sabrina thanks Zelda. I have to assume this is a magical computer virus hex that infects the magic battery. Either these are supernatural, or they're made by jerks like computer ones. The clones naturally insistent that she's her own person, and uses magic to change her outfit. She has a right to her own fashion sense. If this affliction was made with malicious intent, it makes sense that she'd be different from her and evil. Sabrina doesn't want her clone walking around where others who might find out about her would see her, because she thinks she's dressed too skimpy. So that's how she always felt about how Della dresses. It wouldn't be a problem if she was sent to another universe. I'll just call Clone Sabrina Katrina, because Clone Sabrina and Evil Sabrina take too long to say. Katrina uses magic despite her for trying to make her feel bad about her fashion sense. So she puts cheese in her mouth. There's worse things she could have done. Cheese is good for you after all. She warps away wanting to have some fun. So far she's not too bad. Zelda sees the cheese in her mouth and somehow assumes that it was Sabrina's idea. At least she's got her personality from little Sabrina instead of no personality. She reads a book that the artist was too lazy to write a name for on the cover of it. She tells us stuff we already know, wasting a page. Zelda says they have to put the evil twin back in her because she has her powers. Which only makes sense because she exists because of a virus, so it was intentionally programmed to inconvenience her. Somehow Zelda doesn't instantly think to teleport the girl to her in chains. Instead cares that she didn't say where she was going, and decides to summon a witch doctor. Of all the places Katrina could have gone, she warped outside where Hilda was, and says she's Sabrina. I guess her magic tapped into the brainwaves of the people around her to find out how to take her to where she wanted to go. She uses magic to send snow onto people. And I'm shocked when Hilda says, "Sabrina, that was beautiful. It does my heart good to see you finally doing something evil." And she sniffles, sweetly appreciating her. I'm only shocked because so many issues in this era have had her be out of character that seeing her in character again is surprising and confusing. It's always confusing that she wants her to be evil. Especially since when she calls her a bore for insulting her outfit, when Della wears a shirt just like it, she of course gets offended at being disrespected. She should know that's all she'd get if she was evil. Katrina says, "Oh, why don't you make like your groceries and can it?" And uses magic to turn her into a can called Canned Hilda, opting for revenge instead of using magic to brainwash her into being okay with her fashion sense. Like she could have done to Sabrina. That would have counted as revenge too, because it'd be subverting what their original mind wanted and embarrass them a little. But someone spiteful would want more than that. Then the very next panel, she's suddenly next to Sabrina, and Zelda tells the witch doctor good job for bringing her back. If he could think to do that, why didn't Zelda? Katrina wastes time talking, so he uses magic to save the day, and somehow he briefly screws up at first before returning her to normal. I like that when Zelda sees the can, she says, either Hilda started her own food company or a bad Sabrina packaged her. Sabrina smartly says that she's gonna be in a pretty nasty mood when she gets out of there. I thought she was turned into the can. Zelda's also surprisingly smart and says, "You're right. I don't feel like listening to it." And it is getting late. The dialogue's amazing lately. So they callously decide to leave her shrunken in the can instead of simply erasing her memory of what happened. I guess because they want to get back at her for her various flaws. I feel like that's shocking for the stories of this era. This story was about Sabrina catching what I have to assume is an artificially created witch sickness gotten from her asymptomatic aunts after they interacted with other witches or monsters, and that causes her to sneeze and create an evil twin of herself. At least the way she was created was creative. It made enough sense for me to respect the story and understand why she's evil. The whole time I was noticing that she's not nearly as evil as she could be though. Sure, she shouldn't have done what she did, but she barely got to do anything. So maybe she doesn't have standards and just wasn't mad enough to be too evil. It was mean of her to send snow at people, but the story didn't get too dark. So for what little I saw of her, I like her for not being too mean. She could have hurt people or worse and didn't for no apparent reason. She also could have spent the whole plot just tormenting Sabrina, and I'm glad she didn't. In addition to it being too mean, there'd be no interesting variety in the plot that way because she'd only be talking to one character in one place. The 90s comic had the evil twin get to do a lot more stuff for a properly long story for this kind of plot. With this premise, where Zelda and Sabrina are still in the same universe and know about her right away, she should have known that by letting Zelda keep her powers, she was guaranteed to get warped to them and lose her consciousness fast. There's no reason Zelda wouldn't have warped her to her right away, so it doesn't work as well. Archie and Friends 20. For some reason, the colorist decided to give Esmeralda brown hair instead of black hair. She asks Sabrina why they have to tour a stuffy old house with mortals. Sabrina says it's historical, and she's trying to do something constructive with her while she's babysitting. How is that constructive, though? Esmeralda taunts her that Sabrina was scared she was going to turn the neighbor's dog into an aardvark again, and immediately makes me wish Sabrina would wisen up and have her be turned into a statue for the entire time she'd be babysitting her, or at least have her completely depowered. Let me guess, she'll keep abusing magic out of boredom. They go to a mansion that's now a museum. The girl asks if this place is haunted, calling it a dump. Sabrina calls her out on it, and the woman has wonderful patience, just saying that there's been rumors of that, but no proof. Esmeralda wants to ask where the restroom is. Sabrina tells her where it is, and Esmeralda casts a spell to give her proof that this place is haunted, making the painting look like her and Tonk. A door gets replaced with a solid wall, and Sabrina's actually impressed because that's pretty original. And we definitely need original stuff because the haunted house is extremely cliche to the point where it's been a trope for thousands of years. The tour guide tells everyone there's a fire escape upstairs. Then an actual ghost shows up. Her parents owned the place, which makes me wonder why her parents aren't here too. Not to mention why she's here. And people get scared by the wall decorations and bookcases start falling towards them. Sabrina uses magic to slow them down so that people can make a break for it. And she hands Esmeralda a book that the ghost pops out of. That scares her out of the house. And Sabrina thinks that when news about the haunting gets out, there's going to be more tourists showing up here. It's just another story where Esmeralda uses magic a lot when there's no excuse for that happening. Because Sabrina should have depowered her or froze her in time. A witch wouldn't have these problems. While the idea of a haunted house is cliche, at least Esmeralda's spells tried to do things that don't tend to happen in these stories. Benny and Veronica Double Digest 62. Sabrina complains to Ambrose about Hilda having pinups all over her room, because they're posters of Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun. People so over-the-top evil that them being referenced like this is kind of jarring when Hilda's got a surprising soft side at times. And she's a softie most of the time in this era. So even her being a witch doesn't have this make sense. Archie Double Digest Magazine 91. Hilda wonders why Sabrina insisted on her and her family coming to the ski resorts by bus instead of by broom. And Zelda has to explain to her after all of this time of knowing her for some reason that she wants to look normal. They're told they get a deluxe cabin all to themselves, and the guy at the desk gets told he did good work because the other customers would have flipped if they saw old ladies with witch hats for no reason. I don't know why Hilda thinks her cabin has a haunted look. Sabrina hears someone insult her aunts, and I'm relieved that she resisted the urge to abuse magic on him for it, because most people would react like him. It doesn't make him evil. She's upset that with her aunts around, she'll never meet any nice guys. This is confusing because she's in the 70s comic art style, and this isn't a laugh comic story. And yet she's either before Harvey or never met him, or she finally broke up with him. Her aunts think the ski lift is expensive. I don't blame them for getting mad. So they make the wise decision of flying on brooms to get to where they want to go. Since nobody will believe any witnesses anyways, it makes sense that they know they can get away with this. The guy flirts with Sabrina, and for no reason Sabrina admits that the people flying on brooms are related to her, so he gets scared and leaves her alone. Later on, Sabrina's aunts go back to her from the dance early because nobody wants to dance with them. It sure is nice of them to not brainwash the people at the dance instead of dancing with them. Zelda wants to find someone who would appreciate them for who they are, but Sabrina doesn't dance with them. Sabrina would look smart if she zapped up some people who would act like they appreciate them and want to dance with them. She'd also look considerate. We see her at the dance, and someone greets her and says he likes Edgar Allan Poe stories, Stephen King, and Dracula, because it's spooky stuff. He introduces Sabrina to his parents who are dancing with each other, and then Hilda talks to Sabrina dancing with a Frankenstein and says she dug him up. She must not mean literally, because why would he be buried? She just means she zapped him up, and she's just saying that to pretend she's not a witch in a half-assed way. And everyone could assume this guy and the werewolf are just people in costumes. Which is so weird, but wouldn't terrify people. At least until they blink. Again, Sabrina admits for no reason that she's related to her aunts. And as I'm under the assumption that it'll turn out this guy's a warlock who's fine with this, Sabrina runs off, thinking sadly that she'll never meet anyone decent. He runs up to her, and she stupidly tells him to go away because she doesn't want his pity. He says that he needs her pity, because he realizes that his family isn't nearly as exciting as hers. Later on, he holds her hands and wants her to promise that she'll let him visit and watch her aunts perform their magic. Does that mean he's actually immortal? That's a huge surprise. I'm glad it didn't do the same exact twist that some other stories did. But it also makes it sad that it'll never show up again. It's also shockingly lazy that he's never been given a name. Sabrina kisses Hilda on the cheek for being so interesting. This story was about Sabrina going to a ski resort with her aunts for no reason, even though she should have known that they'd embarrass her with their pragmatic insistence on using magic, which is entertaining throughout the story. If she wanted to meet a new boyfriend, confusingly, poor Chip, then she should have known not to bring them along. Maybe her primary reason for coming here was so that she and her aunts would have fun here. She wanted to do them a favor. And meeting a new guy was just a secondary bonus to her if she got lucky. And she did get lucky, because someone who sees her relatives dancing with a Frankenstein and werewolf is just humbled because his family isn't as exciting as that. And he wants to see them use magic. They never used magic in front of him in the story, and he had no reason to think they zapped up those monsters. So I assume they blinked in front of him, or Sabrina told him they were witches and he saw them use some magic off screen. I like that he was immortal, even if it means she got especially lucky that he reacted well. Archie's Pal Jughead 1993-92. Sabrina wants her aunts to know about modern technology and decides to send an email home and see if they know how to answer it. Why would she expect them to even know they got an email? I guess she assumes they won't. She assumes they don't know how after just one panel where presumably no time has passed, so that's dumb of her. And then Hilda astral projects herself through the computer screen and calls it me-mail. So I guess she cast a spell so that she'd instantly know telepathically that Sabrina sent her an email. So that was interesting and charming. It's more of a surprise than her not responding or doing so with telepathy, which would have been smarter letting her continue to do what she was doing. Betty and Veronica Spectacular 23. In the first comedy page beyond the 90s comic where the main characters have their 90s designs, Hilda says that Ghost Toasties is her favorite cereal, and asks her to get the milk for her while she's distracted. Her loving cereal with a name like that is all the more surprising when she looks like a normal woman. So Sabrina somehow summons a cow to her by accident, when she wouldn't have imagined that. Hilda says that at least it's fresh. Archie's Pal Jughead 95. Hilda tells Sabrina to come follow her quick because Salem's playing with a mouse. Sabrina relatably says, "I'm supposed to want to see this?" I love that Hilda's casually watering her plants by having her watering can float while she's reading, like a witch would do every time. It turns out he's playing with a computer mouse, and he hates playing solitaire, which he could do without a computer. So why was this considered interesting enough for the whole family to see? Even if it's the first time he's ever used a computer, that's still pretty boring. I guess it's the first time he played solitaire. But at least it had casual magic and a charming pun. Salem looks horrible. Betty and Veronica 115. Sabrina tells Salem that he never gets enough exercise and it's not healthy. He doesn't want to exercise and stupidly tells the witch that she can't make him. She casts a spell to make him run on an elevated treadmill near a fence with barking dogs behind it. Why did she have to be so mean? A witch could just zap away any weight he gains. Why did she even think he needed exercise? Betty 55. Sabrina says a full moon is beautiful in the car. And Harvey says that it's spooky and he expects a haggy old witch to cruise by in a broom. She's offended when he says that the witch would cackle all the time. So she turns him into a chicken. That was mean. He won't remember it anyways, and she'll change him back pretty quickly, so it's not too bad. But she was being unfair because he doesn't know she's a witch. So of course he made fun of them. She was supposed to just be patient with them and change the subject. But it is more relatable of Sabrina to not always be emotionally strong enough to resist the temptation of using magic when she's mad. Betty and Veronica 117. Zelda cares enough to ask Sabrina if she likes the old movie. Sabrina cries and thinks it's wonderful, and she says she's really getting into it. Then she teleports herself into another universe to be held by the actor, whose character is a real person in that universe, while having the TV show her to Zelda on purpose. That's the only way to make sense of this. Archie 466. Hilda tells Sabrina that the vacuum's out for repairs when she wanted to practice her flying. Too bad none of these witches just pointed to instantly fix it after remembering how it used to be. So Hilda gets an idea and has Sabrina fly while holding a handheld vacuum, which he thinks is ridiculous to make it all the funnier. Betty and Veronica 118. Salem says on the phone that humans are a pain and nicely tells his friend to hang in there and calls him pal. He makes her do a spit take when he says he was talking to a parrot with the wrong number. It would have still had to be a witch turned into a parrot, because only that kind of parrot would have the human intelligence to use the phone and carry on an actual conversation. Betty and Veronica 119. Amy sarcastically asks Sabrina, "What brings you to the veterinarian? Not feeling well?" Sabrina's here for Salem's annual checkup. It's such a coincidence that Amy's there too with her parrot, which speaks. And then Salem can't resist showing off that he can talk too, and says he wants a juicy bird. Amy doesn't have the composure to stick around and figure out how that's possible and runs away screaming. And Sabrina says that tomorrow she'll have to convince her she can be a ventriloquist, which she'd only have to do if she desperately wanted her to remember this just to spite her. And if Amy saw Salem's mouth move when talking, which she definitely would have because she'd be looking at his face in shock, then she'd have no reason to buy that it was Sabrina talking when a cat's too dumb to know to move its mouth in convincing lip flaps when the owner hasn't given it a signal. Betty 57. Veronica insulting Betty's fashion makes her in favor of uniforms for the school, but she's nice enough to care about how the other kids feel about it regardless, which is impressive, as if she only cared about what she wanted, the whole plot wouldn't happen. It's mostly a Betty story until I get to the part where Sabrina shows up. Her high school is considering forcing the students to wear uniforms, like my high school did. Except this is a public school, which makes it confusing. And it's controversial among a lot of the students. Even getting Midge and Moose to argue because Moose hates the uniform for a stupid reason that makes me wonder what side the author's on. It seems jarringly out of character for Ethel to call Jughead a freak because of the clothes he usually wears. And I don't see how Veronica's surprised that everyone will be forced to wear the uniforms, or how Betty's surprised that uniforms are controversial. Betty tells Sabrina that the idea of uniforms is causing disharmony and discouragement all over the school, and says there needs to be a way to keep the students united to avoid chaos. Then Sabrina tells Betty to organize a rally at school and take a vote on uniforms. But the students never have any say over whether they get to wear uniforms or not. The only way they'd get out of having to wear them is if Sabrina used magic to brainwash the school staff into deciding not to make them wear them. And she could claim that the rally worked to cover up her magic. Betty calls Sabrina brilliant and thanks Archie for promoting her rally in the school paper. Sabrina says she'll make sure all the students show up, lies and gets thanked, and then uses magic to create a poster that brainwashes the students into going to the rally, while wisely saying that she works better on her own. Betty gets relatably nervous at seeing all those students and gets the courage to make a speech for 3 panels. And then Josie and the Pussycats plays a song supporting the high school. Betty sees that members of the school board are at the rally, including Mr. Lodge, who's apparently been able to find the time for it despite being a busy CEO who owns whatever company is plot convenient. So all of the students vote no and don't have to wear uniforms. Obviously, all is an exaggeration. But the story ends with Veronica wearing the uniform because she wants to stand out in it. And she does look great in it. So the story ends with a few of the girls wearing uniforms. This story was about Betty's high school staff arbitrarily deciding to force uniforms on the student's body. And eventually Sabrina convinces Betty to do a rally to get the students to vote on it, and smartly uses magic to make them all decide to go there, which makes it justified instead of too plot convenient. Even if it's rare for Sabrina to show up at all in a Betty story, so she might be seen as an overly convenient way to wrap up the plot regardless. But I didn't see the word zap on the page where Weatherby said that the school board would give up the mandate, so maybe the school board wasn't brainwashed into it. But it'd be far more believable if they were, because I don't think a school board that would consider forcing uniforms on a school in the first place would ever care about how the students feel enough to drop that mandate. There were too many pages before Sabrina showed up. They were really just repetitive padding where we see the various main characters' reactions to the uniform idea. Betty and Veronica 120. Salem sees a fish in the window of a fish market and wants to check out the scraps around the bank. He sees stray cats near the garbage and cleverly decides to shout at them to get out of the garbage, which causes them to run away scared. This lets him eat the fish in peace. I like that story. Most of the Salem stories have involved them using magic, so it's more creative when he doesn't. And he still used something supernatural to get what he wants because he talked. Cherry Blossom, 1997, 9. Sabrina knocks on the door saying that she's going to be late for school and asks the person in there to hurry up. Neither the answer in there, and instead Salem went in there. And Sabrina asks him to just use a litter box like the other cats because of this. It makes sense because he used to be a human. He'd be doing this a lot. Veronica 72. Hilda says it's lovely outside and her garden's growing well. Sabrina warns her that the neighbors might get suspicious because it's the winter. This is the kind of thing that Della got involved in to stop. But at least it's new that this time it focuses on how it's making the birds sing and her garden grow. Sabrina won't have to tell Hilda she can't get away with this. Archie 470. Sabrina thinks there's no way Harvey's gonna get the winning points for the basketball game. So she cheats at it for him by saying a spell to make him jump higher, which people would hear her say if they're close enough to her. He ends up succeeding, but also gets stuck in the basket himself. And Sabrina's glad that it worked, which tries to offset her spell not entirely turning out how she planned. Betty 60. Sabrina greets Harvey at the door and is asked what she's been up to. She says she was playing with Salem and he asks what's his favorite, yarn or a mouse. And she says neither, because it turns out she was playing chess with them, and he won of course. Betty and Veronica 122. Hilda tells Sabrina that she and her sister are gonna practice scuba diving, which is only believable because they both have the same personality in this comic. It turns out they're gonna scuba dive in the house's aquarium, because they're just that bored. Veronica 74. Sabrina really doesn't want to go to a family reunion, and Hilda says to a relative of hers that he must have grown a foot since she saw him, and it turns out he has a foot on his head. Why? He's not a sewer mutant. Why would he get himself ostracized by creating that or keeping that? He does hide it with a hat, but he's somehow proud to show it off to his family. At least Sabrina shares my sentiments here. It was just a confusing story for the sake of a pun. Archie 471. Sabrina's neighbor tells Salem to get out of his yard again. Why was he in there? I guess to spite him. Then he gets the laziest possible crank call from Salem, which happens every time. Why doesn't he use caller ID to find out it's always coming from a cell phone that's associated with Sabrina's house? Archie Andrews, Where Are You? 114. I don't like the title of that comic either. Hilda says warlocks like Ambrose make the laziest couch potatoes. Sabrina asks Hilda why that is, and Ambrose uses magic and smirks and levitates a fridge to him. He must have only smirked because he doesn't like Hilda and looked forward to doing something that would annoy her. Because this isn't evil, just depriving him of exercise. I like that Hilda and Sabrina are still smiling at the end. So she's not really being needlessly judgmental. Archie's pal Jughead 1993 104. Sabrina flies with a vacuum and shows off by doing a loop. But then she ends up falling and hanging from a clothesline, and she wants to try a longer extension cord next time. Why did she fly around with a vacuum with a cord on it at all? Betty and Veronica 123. Zelda says that Washington's cherry blossoms are beautiful. She says they should see Washington sometime, just as Hilda's walking to the room. So she warps them to Washington when he's crossing the Delaware at that. And that would freak them out. Betty and Veronica 124. Hilda wishes that the person biking by her would throw their newspaper in their yard for once. He says that her aim couldn't be any better, and she uses magic to cover him in newspapers. So he wants to warn the other paper boys about her, when he should know that they wouldn't believe him. Betty and Veronica Double Digest 72. Sabrina says that when you fly in a broom, people stare at you. So now that she's borrowed Della's Witchmobile, she won't have that problem. Even though it's not only an ugly yellow color, but it's also got stuff on it that would attract attention. It says Evil Eye headlights on it, so she would know better. But it was surprisingly nice of Della to let her borrow her car. She must be related to her. Maybe she knew she'd freak people out with it, and so Sabrina would only keep it briefly. And that's the only reason she let her do this. And if she didn't give it back, she'd take it back. Why would Della even have a car if she's the head witch who always teleports wherever she wants to go? I assume it's her Witch World car, and she uses it when she's out of magic. But someone as important as the head witch wouldn't let herself get out of magic and unable to warp somewhere. Veronica 76. Sabrina's aunts are glad they joined the dating service because they loved their date with pilots. Hilda wants to see them again even though they're working, and it's her idea to fly past the pilots on brooms to greet them. She'd know that'd just freak them out. I feel sorry for the aunts. But she could always rewrite memories so that she could make it like this never happened, and warp into the cockpit and lie that they got tickets for the plane, even if that'd be given away as a lie if they didn't warp home fast, because everyone has a seat on the plane but them. Archie 473. Hilda states the obvious when Enchantra and Della warp to her. It's rare for her to have a short hairstyle like this. For no reason, Hilda's smiling about them showing up. Della says they're doing the annual witches census, and Enchantra needs to ask them how many witches they have in their household. So either this is before all the times she visited Sabrina's house in the 90s comic and would have familiarized herself, or this is a different universe. Explain why her hair looks awful. Sabrina makes a pun based on her sandwich when she should know that Enchantra has a temper. So of course she gets punished with magic. She wouldn't be that stupid. At least it was interesting to see Hilda with that hairstyle. Betty 63. Sabrina wonders why Salem would need a cell phone. He doesn't answer properly and just says he's out for a daily walk. She still trusts him with it because she's that nice, and when dogs go after him angrily, he goes up a tree and relaxes and calls the dog catcher to report a pack of strays, even though a few of the dogs have collars. But the catcher would still scare them all away to let him go home. So I admire that clever idea of his, even if I still can't see why he bothered going for a walk outside in the first place. Betty and Veronica 125. Sabrina wants to see a movie with Harvey, who doesn't mind seeing it again. She cries to the point where she uses magic to rewrite the ending of Titanic so that it doesn't sink. Why can't I get to see how she changed the movie instead of just reading Harvey's dialogue about it? It's not as good for escapism and keeping you invested. The idea of the plot is great for taking advantage of how a witch would be, even if it also makes you jealous of her. She knows Harvey saw the movie before and would be confused by this, but she can erase memories. So it doesn't matter. Betty and Veronica 126. Hilda says that the witch Ambrose is dating has a good head on her shoulders, and Sabrina says she guesses the last one wasn't very bright. Zelda reveals that she didn't mean that, and said she was the type of supernatural creature that usually kept her head in her pocketbook, for no reason when she wouldn't be able to see or face people that way. Why would he have dated her? Veronica 77. Sabrina thinks it's a lovely day for a walk in the park. And here's Harvey from behind a bush. Thankfully, he doesn't look bad anymore when he says he thought Amy was inviting Sabrina too. So Sabrina zaps a skunk into Amy's picnic basket. Amy would hear Sabrina talking here and notice her before the skunk. Archie 474. Sabrina doesn't like how Harvey's staring at other girls on the beach. This idea came up a lot. He says she's the only girl for him, and she says she'll make sure of that, and uses magic to make them all look like Sabrina. She wouldn't do that because she'd know it'd just freak him out. She must have only done that with the plans of erasing his memory afterwards. The girls not realizing what happened must be a part of the spell. Betty 65. Harvey gets into a traffic jam on the way to the beach, and Sabrina uses magic to create a new highway letting people go directly to the beach. Then the guy at the toll booth calls someone saying that no one's paying the tolls because every car is driving down the new highway, which he would have been confused about the existence of. He wouldn't be believed about it, but it'd be easy to check. As far as everyone driving to the beach knows, that highway made the world a better place, and it cost money to get rid of it just to make people pay the tolls again. I hope it'd be too expensive to get rid of to the point where it'd stick around. Archie 476. We see Sabrina brag to her aunts that she discovered how to magically travel through the phone line, and she ends up scaring someone because she dialed the wrong number. It was creative of her, but would only be useful if she has to know what the surroundings of someone look like in order to warp there. And we've constantly seen that witches don't need to know all of the information to use magic. Archie and Friends 1992, 31. Sabrina's aunts enjoy flying on vacuums with her. Then suddenly Hilda's vacuum explodes. And somehow the damage was only to Hilda's clothes, as if she's got an invincibility spell on her that somehow doesn't extend to her clothes while she's at it. She tells Hilda she got the generic vacuum bags again, which can't handle these altitudes, and Zelda apologizes. I wish I knew if that made sense. Betty 66. Sabrina tells her aunts she just learned a new way to use her powers. Hilda compliments her and says that's always good to hear. Sabrina says that when the remote control gets lost, you can just use magic. For no reason, her aunts do a complete 180 and get annoyed with her, and Hilda somehow talks as if only young witches today are like this. And neither of them point out for some reason that she could just warp the remote back to her, which she should have thought to do. Betty and Veronica 128, Out of This World. I reviewed it in my video about Little Sabrina 69. It's interesting. Veronica 80. Salem sees a TV show on big cats and wishes he was one of them. He says that he can just imagine himself graceful and lean, stalking his prey before he'd pounce on it. So he asks Hilda to turn him into a big cat. Somehow she can alter his form just fine. I guess Enchantress' spell on him is that he has to remain an animal, not a cat in particular, which is why he was turned into a mammoth just fine earlier. The story ends with them being turned into a fat regular cat because he stupidly didn't specify that he wanted to become a tiger or a lion. Next up is a Sonic crossover.